After you've finished modeling your object and you want to show it off, well, you'll usually go and do a render of it. And what I see a lot of the time is just an object floating in black space. Because there's no environment, there's no other props. It's just like in this case, say we're just this character. But what could make it a little more interesting and be a nicer way of showing off your object is to composite it in a photograph. One of the benefits of compositing in a photograph like this is that I didn't have to build anything except this character, but it feels like a complete image. So in this example, I modeled this little character Gidget and composited it into this photograph, but I didn't use any third-party compositors like Digital Fusion or After Effects, which are great tools. I did it right inside of LightWave. I'll go ahead and show one more example. Here we've got one of my toy shelves. I say one because I have way too many toys and lots of shelves. So here I've put Quincy back here behind all of these toys to blend in this character into this photograph. So again, another way of taking a finished object and putting it in a photograph to have a completed image to show off the object. So let's take a look at doing some basic compositing inside of LightWave so that you can take your objects and put them into photographs. Let's go ahead and close this down. And we'll start by creating a simple object. It doesn't really matter what the object is. If you want to follow along with this video and use your own object, you can. But just so that everybody's on the same page, we'll use a ball. Okay? And I'm just going to use a tessellated sphere with 8 segments and just a little bit under a meter. It doesn't really matter the size. If we want, let's just go with a meter. Just a nice round number. Okay, so there's our object that we're going to work with, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom in, and well, let me center it, and then I'm going to raise it up so that the bottom of the ball is touching the origin, so that it's 0 in the Y. I think that's a good place. I'm not going to worry about turning smoothing on or anything. We'll do all of our surfacing in layout. I'm going to go ahead and save this object, so File, Save Object, and we're just going to call it Ball. And I like giving version numbers, so 001. Save. And then let's send that over to layout. So I'll come up here, send object to layout, and now we're over in layout. So here we're going to start working with putting our object into a photograph. In order to do that, we need a photograph. So I'm going to go over to the image editor, load, and I'm just going to load this image right here. It's just an image at a park. It's a perfect little place that we can throw a 3D object. Close that down. Now, in order to place our 3D object, well, we need to see where it's going to be going in the scene. So we need to use that image in the background. So I'm going to hit Control F7, which is the same. It opens up the effects tab, the effects panel with the compositing tab active, but I'm going to close that down. It's the same as going over to Windows, compositing options. So Control F7 to me is a little bit faster. I like using shortcut keys when possible. So for background image, I'm going to choose the only image in the scene, but it's the image that we picked. Go ahead and close that down. Now you're only going to see this image in the camera view. Okay, camera view is 6 on the keyboard shortcut, but I can just come up here and choose camera view. But I'm not seeing the image. Well, it's an option. It's a display option, so D for display options. And under camera view background, it's set to blank by default, and we choose background image, and now we can see the image. The reason it's set to blank is when you're animating and setting up other things, you probably don't need to see that image. So it will allow you to work much faster if you have it set to blank. But when we're doing our compositing, well, it makes a lot of sense to be able to see it. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yep, that'll work. And now I'm just going to grab my camera. If I didn't want to come down here and click camera, I could just hit Shift C. And the reason I know that is right here on the button, it says plus C, so that's the shortcut key. It's an easy way to learn the shortcut keys is just looking at the buttons. So T for move. And I can move around my camera to put my object where I want it. And also I'm going to try and line up my grid here with the horizon line. So I'm going to say I want the object here, I'm going to use Y for rotate and kind of line up the horizon line a little bit. Okay, and we'll put the 3D object right here. So we've got it lined up and we're ready to take a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to hit F9 for render, and you could, I guess there could be an argument that this has been composited in. There's a 3D object, there's a photograph, and it's sitting right there, but this is pretty bad compositing for a lot of reasons. I don't believe that this object is really there. It's not interacting with the environment in any way, except that it's just sitting right on top of there. So I wouldn't really consider this compositing. I guess that could be open for discussion at some point. But let's try and make this interact with its environment. Well, I can think of a few ways of how we can make it interact. The first way would be for it to, what if it reflected the environment? Well, I could kind of believe that it was there if it was reflecting things in the environment. To do that, let's go take a look at our surfacing options. So I'm going to go over to the surface editor, and let's pick ball. That's the only surface in the scene so far. I'm going to turn smoothing on. Let's do a render of that. I like doing incremental renders just so I can see what's going on. So that looks much nicer. It's nice and smooth. Let's have it let's have it have some reflection. So I usually start with 50%. I'm going to have it be 50% reflective. Let's give it some spec. Let's do 70, and then I'll do 60 for the glossiness, just to tighten up that spec hit. So now I have reflection, and usually I drop, if I'm going to have a reflective surface, I drop the diffuse down a little bit. So let's go with 75 right now, and let's do a render. Okay, not all that impressive. I'm not really seeing anything. I mean, I see the spec hit, but why isn't it reflecting anything? Well, we have nothing in the scene for it to reflect. If I want it to reflect something, I got to tell it, hey, it's in the scene. And having an image in the compositing tab, if I get Control F7, this image right here doesn't get added to the render until the final stages, so it's not actually there. It's just going to be part of the the compositing portion that happens at the very last portion of the render calculation, where it just says, oh yeah, put this image behind everything. So I'm going to close that down, and we need to tell it that we want this in the scene. One way of doing that is if I hit Control F5, it opens up the same effects panel as when we were over at the compositing tab, which is Control F7, except that it dumps us out on the backdrop tab. So right now, the only thing for it to really reflect is this black, this backdrop color. I'm going to add an environment and choose Image World. Image World allows us, if we double click, it allows us to add an image, and I'm just going to use the exact same image that we have here. Okay, close that down. Let's do a render. And now we can see that it's reflecting this image back here, but it's not this image, it's the image that Image World has wrapped around our 3D environment. Okay, so I'm starting to believe it a little bit more because I'm starting to see some stuff. I'm starting to see that there's the sky and there's the ground. It's not quite accurate because I don't see it really reflecting what's right down here. Another thing that would make it a little more believable is if we had it casting shadows on this image. I'd believe that it was really there. If it could cast a shadow on the ground, well, then it must really be there in the scene. So I'm not seeing any shadows. Maybe it's because, let's take a look, maybe it's because if I go over to Render Globals, maybe it's because Ray Trace Shadows isn't selected. So let's try that and see what happens. Still no shadows. I'm going to try and figure out, why am I not getting shadows? Well, even though I have Ray Trace Shadows on and I've got a light in my scene, we can see right here, why am I not getting shadows? Well, there's nothing for it to cast a shadow on. So we really need to make something for it to cast a shadow on. So let's hop back over to Modeler, and I'm going to hop into Layer 2, zoom out, okay, and I'm just going to make a flat plane, something like this. I'm going to center it so it drops it down at the origin, and let's give it a surface name. So grass, or it could be grass, ground, it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to hit OK, S for save, I'm going to synchronize with layout. And now we've got our flat plane. Let's just do a quick render to see, because we have our shadows. Hey, there we go. So I've got a shadow, I've got reflections, but now in order to get that shadow, I've got this big green flat plane. Well, that kind of just ruined any chance of me getting you to believe that this ball is really there, because, well, what's this big flat green plane? Doesn't make sense. So what we have to do is we have to try and come up with a way to keep this flat plane to cast a shadow, but not have it be this screen. So let's take a look at some of our options. I'm going to move over to the surface editor, and for that surface, let's hop over. I'm going to activate right here. I'm going to activate the node editor, open up the node editor, and let's add 2D texture image. Let's add an image to that surface. Let's add the same image that we already have. So I'm going to add this image, and I've got to find a way to project it onto this flat plane so that it matches up. And fortunately, we have, for mapping, we have front projection mapping. It's kind of like using a projector. It'll just shoot that image straight forward, which in this case works out perfect. I don't have to worry about sizing or what axis, because it's going to happen from the camera. So wherever I place the camera, it's just going to project this image. Let's go ahead and close this down, and let's do a render. F9, and you can see that the photograph that's in the background is being projected on here. So everything lines up, but it's a little dark. Okay, I can also see that my shadows, okay, here's this character right here, and his shadow is casting this way, but my ball is casting a shadow that way. That has to do with where my light is. So let's go ahead and position our light, and maybe it'll fix how dark this plane is. We'll take a look. So I'm going to go to perspective view, and I'm just going to move this. I'm going to minimize this for right now, and we need to readjust our light. So I'm going to select this light, and you know what? I personally like working with area lights. So I'm going to go to the light type, and I'm going to choose area light. I like that kind of light much better. I'm going to hit 5, which is the same as coming over here and using light view. T for move, Y for rotate, and I'm kind of like the lighting guy, trying to get the light in what I would think is the right place. Come up here, maybe rotate down, and now I'm going to move over to the perspective view, and actually if that's where my camera is, there's a guy here casting a shadow here, so I actually have the light in the wrong place. And now I've got to, when you're trying to position it with a ball shape, well, it's the same no matter which angle you're looking at, so that can kind of throw you off. Okay, so we'll try something like this. Come back to my perspective. So there's my camera, there's my light. I'm actually going to size the light up a little bit. If I size up an area light, it's going to soften the shadows, and I might have to bring it back down depending on trying to match the shadows. So come back over to my camera view. Let's do a render and see what's happening. Okay, so we've got my shadow facing in the right direction. It's pretty dark, and I'm not really liking the color, but we can go back and adjust that. But I'm not really buying this surface still. I mean, I can still see there's a hard line there. Look how bright the sun is shining on this, and then all of a sudden it got darker over here. Unless there's a giant UFO or something flying above, that really doesn't make sense. And the fact that he would actually be in shadow also doesn't make sense if we're going to have that shadow. So let's go back to our surface editor. I'm going to go to the grass surface, and let's increase the luminosity. I'm going to try 30%. Whenever I'm typing in numbers, I'm not really taking a wild stab at what I think it is. I just type in a number and see what the result is. And I can see that it's brighter, but it needs to be even brighter. I can still see that line. Our goal is to make it so that you can't see any line, any distinction between where that plane is and where it's not. So I'm going to try 40. And I don't know if you guys can see it, but I'm still seeing a slight line. So I'm going to try 45. I think I'm really close on matching it. Okay. Let me toggle with the page up and page down. It's still kind of there. It's really subtle, but if I can avoid it, I'm going to. I'm going to go 50. Might be a little too high, but I can always bring it back down. Okay, let me toggle. Page up, page down. Okay, I'm not really seeing a line. Okay, so now I've got reflection, shadow. I can't see, well, I don't see where the flat plane is, so to me it looks like it's casting a shadow on this grass. The color of the shadow is a little off, and we can tweak that if we'd like. Let's go ahead and close this down, and I'm going to come over to Light Properties, and under Shadows, let me pick, it's kind of a bluish green. I'm going to, well, let's just try this. It's one of the basic colors, but maybe we'll get lucky. And we're actually not too far off. It's a little bright. Let me darken that a little bit. Let's see. Okay, so we're pretty much there. We've got the shadow color, and even the darkness is pretty much matching. So if we want, I've got my ball here casting a shadow. It's reflecting the environment. I can of course tweak all these settings. If I want, over in Surface Editor and back on the ball surface, if I want this to be 100% reflective, like a mirror, well, I can set 100%, and that's probably not going to give us everything we need. If I want it to be 100%, well, I'm going to drop the diffuse to 0. Okay, this will be 100% like a mirror. Okay, so that's a good little thing to remember. If you ever want to create a mirror surface, drop the diffuse to 0 and the reflection to 100%. But to me, it's looking very 80s, very too reflective. So I'm going to go for, say, 50 and 75 and see how that looks. To me, that looks better. Now, one thing that I'm noticing is, see the shadow on the sphere? Well, I'm not seeing that shadow in my reflection, and well, I should. It should be reflecting what's right below it. So one thing that we haven't done yet that could help, depending on how accurate your reflections need to be. I mean, I can see that this little guy here, well, he's there, and we can assume that there's some water off on the side, and there's grass, but we have a flat plane there for it to ray trace reflect, but we haven't told it to do that. So I'm going to go to Render Globals, and turn on Ray Trace Reflections. And the only thing for it to really reflect in this case would be the ground, but that should dress this up a little bit. Okay, so now we have the shadow being cast in there, but I'm seeing that it's added some of this water here that I might not want to see. Let's go to Perspective, and let's see if we take this flat plane, H for stretch. I'm going to stretch it in just a little bit, and let's see if we can adjust our reflection there. Okay, did it a little bit. What I'm also seeing is that I'm seeing aliased pixels. That's where, let me zoom in here, where you get the real choppy pixels. We have no anti-aliasing on, and that's also going to dress this up. So I'm going to go over to the camera properties, and under anti-aliasing, let's choose enhance low. That's 5 passes of anti-aliasing. We'll do a render. Much nicer, much softer, and we have our 3D object, and because it's interacting within our image here, we've got, again, it's reflecting and it's casting a shadow, it becomes more believable that it's there. Some things to keep in mind is that not only do you want to have it, not everything is going to be reflective, so sometimes it's just going to be a shadow. Sometimes it's going to be just a reflection and no shadow if this was flying up in the sky. Make sure that you try your best to match the direction of the shadows. Make sure that you try and match the darkness or lightness of the shadows and the color of the shadows. I think that's important to make it believable that it's really there. And And also remember to get your camera at the right angle. Even if we had all these other elements right, if the camera is at a weird angle and the shadow didn't look flat compared to the other shadows in the scene, well, the perspective would be off, and we wouldn't believe that it was really there. So hopefully this will get you started in taking your finished 3D objects and trying to come up with a finished looking image without it having to be floating in 3D space. That's always been a big pet peeve of mine, is seeing this really nice model that someone spent a lot of time on, and then the render that they're using to show it off is just kind of floating in nothingness. So if you don't have time to build an environment, or don't want to build just a quick little slope sheet, kind of like a product shot type background, then grab a camera or find an image online and just plop it right in there and use the compositing options right inside of LightWave.